In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Welcome to the Temple Mount Podcast. My name is Shogun, aka Revenant Shogun, aka Ghost, whatever you want to call me. And joining me today is my good friend and Marshall, Egg-Based. And like some other members in our server, he is a member of that ancient and august institution known as the Ancient Order of Freemasons, or something along those lines. He's a Freemason.
The
And
Order
we
of
are,
Ancient Free and Accepted Masons. Yeah.
thank you, yes. The Order of Ancient Free and Accepted Masons, with connections from everything from King Solomon's Temple to the Knights Templar. We're going to dive into that. Make sure you find our previous podcasts on that topic and others on the Temple Mount BitChute and YouTube channels. And most of all, make sure you join us on the Temple Mount Discord server so that you too can have a podcast and you too can speak with these interesting people and be part of this amazing community. That being said, welcome, Eggbase. Thank you for joining me, and thank you for agreeing to do a podcast on short notice. How are you, sir?
I appreciate your welcome. I was more than happy to schedule something for this evening because I know you and I have a great number of things to knock off our list of podcasts. I'm doing very well this evening. How are you?
I am feeling fantastic, and as you know, I've been through a lot of ups and downs and lefts and rights lately, so my current existential configuration is definitely acceptable, and that is the standard by which I measure things. And I'm looking forward very much to this conversation. Um, so, we're going to talk about Freemasonry and your involvement in Freemasonry, and we understand you won't be able to answer all questions or speak on all subjects. But when, in terms of what time in your life or what time in history, did you first think to yourself, I should become a Freemason? And what do you think was the reasoning that you had at that time?
So, of course, you need some background, and I'm sure I've given a lot of this context on the server, but I had a number of miraculous experiences, one of which was my relatively miraculous or explicitly miraculous healing from my chronic illness of 7 years. I had a headache 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 7 straight years. And I was getting all sorts of medical treatments. I'd seen probably 16 doctors, and I was eventually getting prednisolone injections into the side and back of my head with big needles at Tufts. I was seeing the Director Emeritus of Neurology. And those worked for about 2 weeks, and I could only get them about every 3 months. So we started to pursue alternative medicine. And my aunt referred us to a psychic. I went there, and the psychic, of course, I'm leaving lots of details out, but the psychic, among many other things, resolved my skepticism surrounding psychic phenomena, and then subsequently told me that I had blocked my third eye when I was about 8 years old, and that it had been killing me since. And you'll recall that, at 7, I had asked for wisdom. And then at 8, I had descended into like depression, like deep depression at like 8 years old. And apparently that was due to the fact that I had really blocked myself off from the spiritual experiences I was having at such a young age because there was just no support or education on the subject. And the psychic basically told me to go and obtain this crystal called apophyllite and take it back to my house and put it on my head and pray for the intercession of the Archangel Michael in the presence of the spirit of my deceased grandfather, Michael. So I was like, fuck it, my medical bills or what? Every time I do this, $6,000. And then the rock is 40. So I went to Boston. I went into a place called 7 Stars and purchased this crystal and then transported it in my pocket from Boston back to the island of Martha's Vineyard where I lived at the time. Immediately upon arriving in my house, the sun was coming through the window and had projected this prismatic rainbow on the ceiling. And I laid under it and put the rock on my head and said the prayer, and the headache went away. So I cried for about a day and a half out of joy. And my dad had a similar reaction. He got home and I was just weeping on the floor. He was like, "What the fuck?" And so this immediately set me off on this massive journey of spiritual inquiry because I was immediately projected out of a period of explicit militant atheism and materialism through faith, like beyond faith, into straight knowledge. And I then knew immediately that there was something there instead of having faith or belief in such a thing. So I set out finding the answers to this question. And I went across almost every path you could name. I went through a couple of schools of Buddhism temporarily and landed on Vajrayana, which I practiced extensively. I studied, of course, the Catholicism that I was born under. I was in weekly meetings with my priest who had baptized me, and he had just about talked me into joining the Jesuit priesthood, but that didn't work out at the time. I experimented with Scientology for a couple months. Let's see, what else? Hinduism. I had researched the Kabbalah briefly, and I settled on this sort of crystal idea and was trying to figure that out. So I came to Discord. One of the first people I met was Tios, and he was the first person I met who was able to listen to what I was saying about these spiritual and miraculous experiences and just immediately respond and accept them instead of having all sorts of follow-up questions. So that immediately was, I was like, okay, so I'm going to find answers here. And that set the process off on Discord. So I was going through this period of inquiry. I was just getting into Discord, was having all of these debates about my recent findings. And during this period of time, I was trying to figure out where I could go, who I could join or affiliate myself with, where this sort of thought was transpiring, and where the answers were actually being discussed and where people were arriving at them. And I failed and failed and failed again and simply couldn't find anything. And I read up and down sacred texts, Vedas. I read through the Bible. I read the Bible. I learned Latin mostly from my mom, read the Bible in Latin. And I went through so many things trying to find the one. And so I got into this undercurrent after researching all these religions that was the central truth and the idea of this central homogeneous veracity that purportedly pervaded all things and was present, at least in part, in every story ever told and in every religion and spirituality across the world. And I began putting those pieces together and eventually found that perennialist syncretism is a big part of Hermeticism. So I began pursuing Hermeticism. I read through the Hermetic corpus and found myself looking for, again, some sort of group or organization I could affiliate myself with that would further my practices in that regard. So I looked into this and again, and did all the research on the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, the Rosicrucians, and found that all of these societies had fundamentally been offshoots of Freemasonry. And I've heard of Freemasonry at the time, but had no idea what it was, and had met some Freemasons through Discord by now, was inquiring about it with them. And then I moved to the mainland, and this was the whole business with the crystal was in 2019. And the period of inquiry extended through the end of 2019, throughout the entirety of 2020. And then probably by about September, I had decided on Freemasonry, and I began the process of applying. Of course, first you meet, and so I called the local lodge and left a voicemail for the secretary. He reached out via email and invited me to their social gathering that they have, usually once a month. And in this case, at the time, it was a local restaurant that all the guys would get together at, and they had a standing table once a month for, I don't know, probably about 30 people. So it was the officers and a few active members and the wives, etc. So I became involved in this initially by going to dinner with a bunch of guys older than me and some people my age. It's not like the entire fraternity is composed of people my dad's age. But so I go to this dinner. I'm introduced to everybody, and they hand me an application. And the application is probably about 7 pages, and you fill out, name, all your information, and there's a number of questions. Are you 18 or older, etc. And so that was that. It was the pretty logical transition from going through that period of inquiry up to getting the application. And I could go into that more, but I figured I'd let you steer me a little.
Well, that was an excellent introduction to what I would call your personal existential mystery or existential path. First of all, can I just get an audio check? Am I very quiet? Am I coming through?
10 by 10.
Perfect. So this is meant sincerely. I think there are an unusual number of similarities between yourself and myself, given that people like yourself and myself have, by definition, a minority experience of life. There are many similarities that I observe, which you may or may not observe, and perhaps I'm being unrealistic in seeing so, but there are a lot of similarities there in terms of being drawn into spirituality and into deeper existential questions at a younger age, and coming to a more complex position existentially than most. So elaborate for me again, if you will, how you see that you're being drawn to Freemasonry, right? You've obviously been drawn to Freemasonry. Something has called you to it and told you, out of all the things I could get involved in, this is the one that is right for me. How does that connect to your existential mystery? How does that connect to your reason for being incarnated here on Earth? And I realize these questions are really like detached, and I'm speaking from sort of a floaty consciousness place. But my question is, like, why do you think that you were drawn to Freemasonry? For example, I was drawn to the Anglican Church, right?
No, it's a good one. It ties right in, but keep going.
Well, I was just going to say, I have a strong pull to the Anglican Church specifically. And I know that, like, the Anglican Church is something that I have to be part of. And I don't exactly know why. And I would assume that you have a similar feeling towards Freemasonry. So have you meditated at all on why that would be something that, because out of all the possible things you could have gotten into in this incarnation, why do you think it's Freemasonry for you?
Well, absolutely. And I don't think it's actually as tangential as you represented the question to be. So I did pace over briefly the process of concluding that Freemasonry was a logical next step. But to answer your question, what I didn't go over, of course, is the many thousands of people I was interacting with during 2020 and into 2021 who were of spiritual backgrounds in the community that had been put together to that effect. And during that time, I learned about my immense capacity for divination and for exacting practicality out of ceremonial magic. And the realization through that was that souls carry along with them. This is not an uncommon thread, especially around here, that souls carry with them the experience of their previous doings, their previous, you could say incarnations. I'm generally looking for a term that's a little broader than that. But just the karma, like all the past actions of a soul are carried with it in some form or representation. So in this case, that was something that interested me. So I delved immensely into it. And I'd had a number of keystone experiences with LSD where I'd experienced a lot of these past lives and been through most of what my soul was experientially, hadn't made any sense of it intellectually, but had been through it experientially. And I began deciphering this finally years after it had happened in 2020. And I came to a lot of conclusions which sounded self-aggrandizing to me, so I've kept them entirely to myself. But it became evidently clear, especially upon all of my digging into astrology and learning so much about it, and the logic and the way to interpret very specifically the signs, the houses, the placements, even the degrees and minutes of the placements, aspects, and all of those things. Just for disclosure, I have a Taurus stellium in the 12th house. The 12th house is generally associated with mysteries, the unknown, and the 12th house is, it's the house of Neptune. It's the magician resides entirely in the 12th house. It's the unseen, the invisible sun, and all of my core being is placed there around the sun. And so, of course, I reached this capacity, but I, as an existential being, was obviously very involved in inquiry and in mystery schools and in these pursuits of deep spirituality and existential agency. So I had this inherent fascination with the mysteries. And there are no standing mystery schools that I can speak of publicly. Not to say that they don't exist, of course, but if they did, I could neither confirm nor deny their existence, even if I had knowledge of them, et cetera, et cetera. However, this one, which is publicly available, which you could say is a gateway into some others, although again, could neither confirm nor deny that, nor am I saying that I know any such thing. Freemasonry has never been more outwardly known than it is now. It has, for a long time, been a secret. And that originally was the most outward and most directly available expression of that hidden influence. And that sort of existential draw to be a seeker. I think that's what I always have been, is a being in search of the order and in pursuing the expression of that order through understanding, communication, and these deliberately spiritual pursuits.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. So now that you have entered into the initiatory practice and the ancient mystery tradition of Freemasonry, what can you tell us, in whatever way you can tell us, about the benefits that you feel you've gained? In other words, what kind of spiritual, emotional, physical, social benefits have you noticed? In other words, what have you gained since you started till now? What do you think you've gotten out of it?
Well, okay, and there's a lot. But I'd like to preface this by saying that the fraternity is not a benefit organization. And the things which it gives you, you have to be prepared to receive. Many people join expecting those to manifest visibly, tangibly, and immediately, and they leave very quickly because they don't stick around long enough for their expectations to come to fruition. The reality of the situation is that I can tell you all about these benefits, but the fraternity gives benefits to certain people looking at it from one direction. And then from the other direction, only certain people derive benefits from the fraternity. The initiatic structure is such that people who are unworthy of it should never go through it. But on the chance that they do, they get almost nothing out of it because they don't ever come to understand it. And vice versa. The fraternity derives very little from people who don't take it seriously and who don't understand it and who don't actually get past the part where they see it as a social organization. which to some degree it is. I'm not saying it isn't. For me personally, the initiation came at an interesting time in my life. Uh, during, from the time I began the inquiry process, where I, filled out this paper application that asks me all of these questions, to the time when I eventually took the third degree, and that me in the photo is me after my third degree initiation on the same day. During that period of time, I went from not having a driver's license, living at my mom's house, to being 21 with a driver's license. Had my girlfriend living with me, was working, moving out. I was 21, and I had this great circle established. And then I almost immediately sat as an officer. So things took sort of a meteoric rise from the time when I began inquiring about Freemasonry. So the initiation structure is divided initially into 3 degrees. They're called the Blue Lodge degrees. The first is that of the entered apprentice, the second that of the fellow craft, and the third is the sublime degree of Master Mason. And in succession, you are entered, passed, and raised, respectively. So I submitted the application. The application was presented and read in front of the lodge at their stated communication. So that took a month. The communications are monthly. It was read at the first monthly communication after I had completed the paper application. A committee of investigation consisting of 3 officers was assigned to me. They came to my house upon scheduling that with me and inquired of me in person, basically the matters on the application, including any other questions or things they may have to discuss at their discretion. They then reported to the next monthly communication and reported to the next monthly communication in the presence of all the other officers, the conclusions that they'd drawn from that investigation. And then there was a ballot. And the Masonic ballot is entirely secret, such that there's actually a specific box constructed so that each member of the fraternity present may cast their vote without any other members knowing which vote they cast. And it's entirely secret. It must be preserved. If the ballot is in any way corrupted, it's immediately repeated. And you have to be voted in entirely unanimously. So all present must vote for your admission. And if even one of them neglects it, then I don't believe you can ever join again, ever. Now, of course, the number of times that happens are slim to none, because for someone to have already gotten to that point, they need to have met basically all of the criteria. So I was unanimously voted in, and then I was informed of this. My entering was scheduled. The experience of the 3 degrees I cannot describe except in very general terms. I initially, there are a number of puns that are given to the candidate for the degree of entered apprentice. So, usually the secretary will call you at like 8:30 p.m. the night before and tell you to like wear clean underwear and ask you if you're allergic to like, I don't know. I don't remember what mine was. They'll ask you if you're allergic to penicillin or something. You know what I mean? So they'll ask you a bunch of like wackadoodle questions just to kind of stir you up. And the first degree was sort of it was, of course, a revelation. I didn't know what to expect. I had, of course, paced through a number of tomes and sayings on Freemasonry and was privy to some idea of what the process would entail. But the experience of it was, of course, entirely different. And it's a performance entirely from memory. So all of the officers present are executing this degree having memorized it entirely. It was very impressive. I was extremely impressed by And it left a lasting impression on me and introduced me to a side of these people that I had never seen. Their capacity to execute this process with such a genuine and direct solemnity. It immediately imparted on me a great respect for the people in the room. And that's simply with the first degree. It's indescribable. So having then done that, the degrees are generally, these days, they're done during a period of 3 months. So of course you do the first one during 1 month, and then the next month after that. My first and second degrees were done consecutively, as in 1 month and then the next. They were done in exemplar format. So because of coronavirus, my first and second degree, my first degree was in normal form. My second degree, I actually sat and watched as someone else went through the second degree in my place. And even in that form, my second degree is something that inspired me and still does to this day. It led me to emulate the exact process that I had been put through and to actually actively participate in it in very key and important ways in the near future after my third. So my third degree was actually put off. My mentor in Freemasonry, who to this day is one of my best standing friends. And keep in mind, just for the sake of time, this is about the middle of, it's actually early. My first degree was in late 2020. My second degree was early 2021. I believe it was November and December, I'm sorry, of 2020. My third degree was put off because of coronavirus again. So the third degree is the sublime degree of Master Mason. It is equivalent to college graduation, wedding, birth of a child. It is one of the greatest and most important markations of a man's life that he will ever receive or experience. So this individual who had guided me through the process so far, whom I'd gotten to know, he and his best friend of 40 years were two of the key officers in this process. He convinced me to wait until my third degree could be performed properly, and with me as the candidate in the lodge, under an exact set of circumstances, with me as the sole candidate. And it took 5 months for that to be the case. So I waited for 5 months. And my third degree took place 2 days after my 21st birthday. So it was May 21st of 2021. And let's see. How do I describe? So first off, I'd like to put forward that this was such a monumentous occasion that this individual went out of his way to, during these 5 months, go to each other lodge in the district and stand and petition them directly to attend my third. He had planned this massive cookout. One of the brothers is a brewer. He had made, upon hearing that I liked stouts, he had prepared 3 kegs of stout for this cookout. The district deputy grand master, which I'll get to later, and the junior grand warden, in fact, were present. So I arrived, and of course, by the time that I get there for my degree, so I'm in a suit, I walk into the building. There are a couple of the officers there just to get me through the preparatory measures. But I'm completely unaware at the time, other than having seen the parking lot. I'm completely unaware of exactly how many people are there. And there are other things going on at this massive temple building at the same time. So I have no idea who is actually going to be there for my degree. I had no idea what to expect. I'm put through this preparatory process, and the third degree I can only describe as a complete and utter change in a person's being. It is equivalent to a renaissance of the soul. I have never been the same since then. I have only been better. Um, the fabric of my being is improved. It is one of the singular, most divinely spiritual experiences I've ever had. And the process in and of itself on that day specifically will remain ingrained in my mind for the rest of my life in exact detail. So after having completed this degree in this initiation process, I return to the lodge, the room that is, which by the way is packed wall to wall. There are 2 rows of seats either side, bench seats that go all the way across the room. They're packed. I mean, it would have been standing room only. And the district deputy grand master in attendance um, gave me this particular speech, which is not normally a part of the 3rd degree, but which is common tradition for certain candidates at his discretion. That there's actually a picture which I did not give you of me receiving the Canadian charge, and the inexorable tingle of the buzz of the energy that comes when you listen to an orchestra or some such thing just resounded from head to toe. I mean, I felt as though I was standing in this position of beneficence where some divine presence was reaching down and imbuing me with this thing. And it was as though I had been made a master mason and then empowered as one. Um, Shortly after this, I took that photo where I'm shaking hands with my mentor there, and the district deputy grand master is on my left. And the ensuing party was wonderful. The DD was more than happy to give my parents and my girlfriend a tour of the building. Um, and then there it was, and we sat in this big parking lot, had a massive cookout with everybody there. And there was cigars and scotch, and of course, um, the junior warden had made all this beer. And I was initiated on this large Bible, extremely large. And it's a Masonic Bible. It's got the square and compasses on it. It's this huge red letter tome. And all of the officers had signed their names on the front cover. And one of them, the worshipful brother, is a past master, uh, has since passed. And his passing actually led me to do exactly what he did in my initiation, to learn that role, to go forth and do that. It has been unequivocally the most spiritually fulfilling pursuit that I've engaged in so far. And I have no questions or qualms about it. I have been sharply critical and relatively neither here nor there on a number of things that I've pursued, which have been, in fact, very major. But this one, I've never questioned it. It has been singularly fantastic and has made me who I am today.
So I really appreciate you sharing all of that. I think that's very interesting and informative. Before this discussion, we had a discussion about how obviously our server has grown far beyond a community of conspiracy theorists, but it does has conspiracy. Sorry, it does have conspiracy theory in its roots. We've evolved beyond that, but within the conspiracy theory community, there is a significant number of people who attribute Freemasons to being the big bad guys. And I think we can all remember the Simpsons episode with the stonecutters, right? Who makes the Great Wall fall? I can't remember the whole song, right? But basically they're saying,
Freemasons run the world.
yeah, it's all about the stonecutters and how they run everything, right? And a lot of conspiracy theorists, in my experience, running both the Round Table, the Temple Mount, and in a way MK Ultra, there's a certain percentage of conspiracy theorists, perhaps 15 to 20%, who believe that the Freemasons are the Illuminati, the New World Order, the shadow government, the big bad guys. So I want to give you the opportunity now to address all the people who are distrustful and antithetical to Freemasonry and make a case for why they are wrong.
Okay. Well, again, I'm going to issue a preface and say that one, I do not like assessing claims that are being put forward in the third person or hypothetically, mostly because there's no response to be given. And second, that I'm not a huge fan of presenting arguments to captive audiences merely because it has no effect on any one such individual. I'd also like to say that if anyone here harbors a similar sentiment, I look forward to hearing from you in the discussion of this subject, specifically if I've not addressed your concern directly. So on the subject of conspiracy theories, I'd like to start with the recognition of the fact that anti-Masonic sentiment and skepticism of Freemasonry has existed since its inception. Originally, the stonemasons guilds of the 14th century were secret organizations because operative stonemasons, that is to say, literal workers in stone, were skilled in a very particular art. And they were, by this union, and it really was one of the first types of unions, the masons belonging to these stonecutters' lodges were given certain passcodes and phrases and methods of recognition so that they may travel to other countries and be recognized as master masons or fellows of the craft or entered apprentices, and that they may be recognized, employed, and paid accordingly. So, after about 100 years of such procedure, it is according to the ancient records and constitutions that aristocrats began paying their way in to these lodges that by now had come to incorporate spiritual and moral teachings into their education, not merely passcodes, phrases, and talk of the trade. They had actually analogized so much of their trade into higher meaning. And these wealthy and influential individuals sought to understand these secrets upon hearing that they were being so communicated. So they entered into these lodges, and this became indeed such a trend that the stonecutters' guilds became merely groups of aristocrats and no actual operative stonemasons in them. Subsequently, we entered what is called speculative masonry, where the higher meaning of the profession of working in stone is interpreted as a system of moral teachings veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols, which is, by the way, the definition of Freemasonry. It's a system of moral teachings veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols. So these guilds, of course, became the first Masonic lodges. And we trace our history back to then, to the 15th century. I believe the first records of Masonic meetings took place in the 1450s, about 1456. And then by 1485, we had the degrees having been separated into the first two, the entered apprentice and the fellow of the craft. And then the master was, in fact, not the third degree of a master mason, but the master was merely a denotation of individuals who had sat as masters of these lodges. So onward we go through Anderson's constitutions, etc. But my point being that insofar as there has always been a secret, the people who do not know that secret have always been very cautious and skeptical of it. And this is common among secrets. You keep a secret from someone and they know that they don't know it, they immediately assume that it is fraught with malice. If I, Shogun, were to say things that I was keeping a secret from you, if you were to follow the trend of most human beings, you would say something vis-a-vis, well, why can't you tell me? What's wrong with me? Why can't you? What is it that you're hiding? And what are you hiding is a question that many people ask. The presumption then becomes that the fact that this large and powerful society that has existed for so long, and of which so many of history's greatest figures have been members, must be a catch-all for all of the things which transpire in the dark and all of the the things which go bump in the night and all of the creepy dealings in the shadows must all be taking place in this secret organization which has so much to hide. Now, of course, Freemasonry we do not call a secret society. It is a society with two secrets, namely the methods of recognition and the methods of symbolic instruction. Those are the two things which we keep secret. They are the grips, the signs, and the passcodes, or the words, rather. And they are the rituals, the procedures of initiation. That is the literal symbolic teachings. The rest of it, of course, I can tell you freely. My response to most conspiracy theorists who say that Freemasons run the world is that, in my experience, Freemasonry is a number of increasingly large charitable institutions consisting of 2 to 3 dozen active members who can just about scrape together a cookout. And people say, well, like, how far up are you in this initiatic hierarchy? Like, what number are you? I'm like, well, I'm a 3rd degree Mason. And they're like, oh, well, you don't know anything because you're not a 33rd degree Mason. Like, well, I know about 6 or 7 guys who are 33rd degree Masons, and notwithstanding the fact that they had to get fitted for a white tie and tails to go to the Supreme Commandery, whatever, the House of the Temple in Washington, D.C., to receive the 33rd degree. There's really nothing much else to it. It's an honorary conference upon 32nd degree Scottish Rite Masons who have made significant contributions to the community. You can think of it as like an Oscar for Masonry or an Academy Award for Freemasonry. And that, of course, is my address to them. There are, of course, the readers of Albert Pike who will say that Morals and Dogma, that is the work written by Albert Pike, who was a Confederate general and instrumental in the founding of the Scottish Rite, which I believe is properly referred to as the Morals and Dogma of the Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. And that book purports to teach all sorts of, esoteric and secret things, all of which, with few exceptions, are disavowed by the present Scottish Rite. Now, the southern jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite, I believe, has a different attitude on it, but that tract contains statements regarding Lucifer in a positive light, such things, which are indeed not present in the symbology or practices of the present day Scottish Rite initiation through the 32nd and Conference of the 33rd degrees. That's my address to them. There are flat earthers whom I will not address under any circumstances, but they believe that Freemasons have some thing to do with hiding the geometric proofs that the earth is flat. But those people are untenable. I'm amazed they're allowed to drive cars, let alone vote. And then what else?
Well,
yeah, go ahead. I'm out of conspiracy theories, so please proceed.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, and I think what you've provided so far is an excellent response to my last question, but I'm cognizant there's at least 2 things I have to ask you about, and my memory is notoriously fickle, so it's best that I do it now while I still remember to do so. One is what is called the Taxil hoax, and the second is the letter of Albert Pike regarding the First, Second, and Third World War. And on the case of the second, it's a very interesting subject, and I just want to reiterate that in that document, which is attributed to Albert Pike, although the authorship is disputed and the authenticity of the document is disputed, is fairly undeniably accurate in terms of how the First and Second World Wars came about, and is unnervingly precognizant as regards what we're seeing right now in terms of the Third World War that allegedly Albert Pike laid out in that document, which I will say the University of London admitted to having in their display for many years, and then later claimed never existed, which is highly suspicious to me. So I would like you to comment, if you can, on two things. The Taxel hoax, if you're familiar with that. I'm sure you are. If not, that's fine. And the second thing is the alleged letters between Albert Pike and I believe it was Mussolini, but you can correct me on my details here. And after that, I would suggest we open it up for audience questions and participation, if you agree.
Mm-hmm. So the interesting thing about Leo Taxel is that I don't believe that he actually knew that he was employing the artwork and symbolism of Eliphaz Levi in his famous poster, I suppose, with the Baphomet on it, etc. But what needs to be understood of the Taxel hoax is that it was a mockery of not only Freemasonry, but the conflict between Freemasonry and Catholicism. So this individual has, purportedly written everything in service of Catholicism, which he had only even pretended to convert to. He was a notable anti-papist. And the interesting thing about Taxel was that he asserted that there was this palladist cohort of Freemasons who were taking orders from demons. He presents this high priestess who's converted and is in grave danger of assassination. The problem, of course, is that people see this and they assume on face value that there is no mockery here, that it is to be taken, in fact, at face value. And that, you've got this portrayal of French Freemasons as, priests of demons, etc. What you don't realize is that this Taxel guy was mocking religion as a whole. He was indeed directly mocking the Catholic Church, as he had done so repeatedly in deference to his arguments against papism. So that, I believe, is a relatively conclusive address of the first issue. The second issue relates directly to the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is a notable hoax. This purported letter between Albert Pike and Mussolini, I'm dubious of its veracity. But if it is the case on the face value presumption that this is something that actually transpired, I don't believe that it would be entirely surprising that one could have predicted not only the First but Second World Wars, given that Carl Jung had done precisely the same thing, based entirely on the dreams of his schizophrenic patients. I really don't see a problem with that. The First World War was very easy to discern in its causes, right? But the actual beginning of it, very few people predicted. The Second World War began building as soon as fascism began to rise. And that also could have been very easily predicted. So I don't necessarily think that there's much of an object there. I think there have been a great number of people, especially with spiritual persuasion, who've been able to discern major events of the future with relative accuracy. And there have also been a number of anthropologists and sociologists, even economists, who have done precisely the same thing. So in response to the insinuated claim that Albert Pike acquired this knowledge, or that it was a pre-existing plan of which he had some knowledge, I would say that you don't know much about the man, and that I don't believe that he would be able to be party to such a thing of such intellectual construction. He was not known for his ability to grasp facts. He was very good, the whole secret thing, but I don't necessarily believe that anyone regards him very highly as a knower of great and profound truths. Now, of course, you could say that he does, and I'm sure there are plenty of people who hold that opinion, but I haven't met them.
Thank you for that response. Do you feel it's an appropriate time to open to questions or audience questions and participation?
Not quite yet. There
Okay,
is something else I'd like to touch on.
please do.
So, just for the sake of clarity, um, because I think this also helps to address the world governance question, which is so often asserted by conspiracy theorists. I'd like for the audience to understand that Freemasonry is not a monolith. And in fact, the fraternity differs widely across the face of the earth. So, for instance, I reside in the grand jurisdiction, or the most worshipful, the jurisdiction of the most worshipful Grand Lodge of Ancient Free and Accepted Masons of Massachusetts. So it is you could think of it like the governor's office, right? This state and all Masons and lodges therein are within the jurisdiction and therefore the purview of this governing body. The Grand Lodge appoints district deputies who are his representatives to the various districts. And those districts, which divide up the state geographically, contain a certain number of lodges. So the individual lodges are presided over by masters. The district deputies visit these lodges and speak to these masters and make sure that they're in conformity, cheerful conformity, to the precepts and bylaws of the most worshipful Grand Lodge. And then these district deputies report to the Grand Lodge, which takes the form of any other lodge, but in an entirely different sense of authority and in a much larger building. um, but the Grand Master then presides over that lodge, which governs according to the information on the fraternity that has been gathered. The Grand Lodge collects, I believe, about 1/3 of the dues that I pay, which are in the amount of $216 a year. The Grand Lodge, I believe, is 76 out of that 212. And okay, so there's the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. Each of the 50 United States has a Grand Lodge. Those Grand Lodges have separate bylaws, right? So there are certain things that cannot be changed about Freemasonry. The ritual cannot be changed. The structure cannot be changed. And in order for a Grand Lodge in its jurisdiction, and therefore all of the lodges under it, to be regular, that is actually Freemasons, they must be in amity, that is in conformity to and in deference to the United Grand Lodge of England, which is in London. That United Grand Lodge of England is its own separate jurisdiction and is purely by virtue of its primacy the authority by which all other Grand Lodges are, instituted or chartered is the word, actually. So the UGLE approves the charters of all other Grand Lodges. They're first provisional and then they're established. And then the Grand Lodge distributes charters to lodges under it within its jurisdiction. There's one for each of the 50 states. There's one for each of the Canadian territories. There are many, many in Mexico because it has so many different zones. South America is rife with them because, of course, South America. Brazil, I believe, has one for each of its states, occasionally 2 different locations of the same Grand Lodge. There's one in Hawaii, there's one in Alaska, there's one in Puerto Rico. The Grand Lodge of Japan is, I believe, I don't believe it's any longer in exile, but the Grand Lodge of Japan is actually under the purview of the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. So we do get the representative from Japan. The Grand Lodge or the Grand Master of Japan will occasionally come or send his proxy to the Grand Lodge quarterlies. The Grand Lodge meets quarterly, as do all Grand Lodges. And there are a number of other provisional Grand Lodges which are under the purview of other Grand Lodges. There's one for each European nation. There is, of course, the United Grand Lodge of England for England, Scotland, Ireland separately. France, where anti-Masonic sentiment was very strong in France, almost as much as it was here in the early 19th century. Of course, many of the fascist and socialist governments banned Freemasonry because it's an institution of Enlightenment thought, which says all men are created equal, and that the inalienable rights clause of the U.S. Bill of Rights is, of course, so much derived from many of the moral teachings of the fraternity, as many of its signatories were Freemasons, Ben Franklin, George Washington, etc. But the point is that these Grand Lodges exist as individual forms of government, and they exist across every nation and every state within every nation in the world. The United Grand Lodge of England does not govern or control them. It merely approves them. The Grand Master of each of these Grand Lodges is responsible for its conformity to the regulations which have been established for the fraternity. So as a result, it's not like all the Grand Masters go to England and they all meet in the same building. The UGLE conducts its business, as do the rest of us. And as a result, there really is no united world front of Freemasonry. Again, it's not monolithic. So there would be no basis for the assumption that we could in any way influence directly major global events. You simply couldn't get enough people to agree on it. You couldn't get the Grand Master of Texas to go along with that plan. You know what I mean? You simply couldn't. Can you imagine the Grand Master of Montana being complicit in some sort of new world order? I certainly can't. He's a Montanan. They don't go along with government in any form. So I suppose you see what I mean. And I thought that was a necessary inclusion.
I really appreciate it. I think this has been a deep dive, and I'm certainly going to re-listen to this podcast so I can meditate more deeply on all the information you've given us. Do you feel this would be an appropriate time to open it up to audience questions and participation now, or is there anything else
Absolutely.
we talk about? Okay.
Please
that
go
being
ahead.
said, is there anyone in the audience who has a question or comment for Mr. Eggbased? If the case is,
I would like to ask a question.
Go ahead.
So you were mentioning how, or you were telling us all how it was so almost like life-changing. The ceremony, the performance of the symbolic performance. And I was wondering, is that what caused your transformation? What caused that big change within yourself doing that ceremony?
So it's a good question. And if you're insinuating that the direct cause of the change in me was the actual initiation itself, I would assert that it was. Well, I would assert that it was not. However, that is only to say that merely the ceremony was the cause of the change. I would say that the lessons conferred through the ceremonies and my acceptance of them, my agreeing with them upon analysis and reflection, is truly what precipitated the change. Because you can go through these initiations and get nothing out of them and not pay attention to them and never dive into their meanings and never accept the lessons, and you will not change as a person. I did those things, and it did change me for the better because I accepted the moral teachings.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I had another question for you while other people maybe are considering what they may or may not like to ask. For the people in the audience, both the live audience and those who might later listen on BitChute and YouTube, would you unambiguously recommend that everybody should seek out membership in Freemasonry as something that will be beneficial to them? Or do you feel that it's only appropriate for certain kinds of people? And if so, how could someone know whether or not they're the kind of person who should become a Freemason?
Right. So if we're going to say, would I unconditionally recommend it, my answer would be absolutely not. I actually hope that most people will abstain from even wasting the time of the worshipful masters of a number of lodges by attempting to solicit them for membership. the fraternity has a number of restrictions placed on who it is willing to accept. The first is that you must be a good person, which immediately disqualifies a majority of humanity. The second is that you must be a man freeborn of good report and well recommended, as in you must produce character references. You must present well. You must be relatively untethered. You must not be explicitly committed to anything that it restricts your freedom as a person. Right? And that used to mean that you couldn't be a slave, but now, of course, it means that you must be free. You can't be in prison or anything. Moreover, you must be at least 18, although in some jurisdictions it's 21 years of age. And most crucially, you must affirm a strong and resolute belief in a supreme being or higher power. So no, I do not think that people should merely because they can't. And if I did not touch on the point clearly enough, you must be a man. And then second, the fraternity will not benefit a majority of mankind because they won't allow it to. So the people who benefit from Freemasonry, the people who Freemasonry benefits from are anyone who pays dues. If you join Freemasonry, you pay dues. The fraternity benefits from your existence. But the fraternity does not benefit any further than that, and we don't really need your money. Now, of course, local lodges do. I always say support your local lodge because these small organizations of local towns, they really do need support so they can keep their buildings and so they can host events and so they can afford to have dinners and things like that. But the fraternity is not in desperate financial need of new members. It shall endure for so long as man draws breath. And it is not in any danger of closing. I mean, our membership has declined steadily since, I believe, the late 50s. But in the late 50s, 1 in 10 men was a Freemason in certain jurisdictions. And 1 in 100 men in America was a Freemason. 1% of the population of this country was a Freemason. So you get a football stadium with 10,000 people in it, right? At least 100 of them are Freemasons. So that's what? that's 11 lodges, at least, that you could build out of just the people in a football stadium. So notably, we've declined in our membership, but not to such degree that the fraternity is not in a good state of health. It's merely just not exuberantly full. I mean, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of extremely wealthy, prosperous, and well-populated lodges in every state. Now, in smaller states, that might be dozens. But people have bequeathed their entire estates to lodges previously. As a matter of fact, the lodge up the street from me resides in this gorgeous building constructed entirely out of ashlar stone and has been, like, widowers who have died with no children have bequeathed their entire estates onto this lodge, sort of as a tradition. As a result, it's one of the most prosperous lodges in the entire jurisdiction, the entire state. These lodges do not need your help. So it's not like we're desperate for people to join. The only people who are really going to get something out of this, as I have, are the people who join for the lesson. The people who join Freemasonry to learn what it has to teach them earnestly and out of a position in their hearts that they would like to be better men. And that's the idea, is that it's good men who Freemasonry makes better. There are not supposed to be any bad men initiated in this fraternity, only good ones who are then made better. So you have to be good in your heart. You have to truly wish to be bettered by the teachings. And I personally believe in order to do that, you have to seek to understand them. And a lot of that understanding is very esoteric in nature. It's extremely complicated. I was tested on most of it because I insisted on being so. I memorized so much in order to be able to prove my competency in these lessons prior to receiving further initiation. And the sort of person who truly benefits from this is someone who seeks to know more of themselves and more of what they can do as a person, more of how they can be good and what principles they should govern themselves by. And specifically people who do not already derive that from a religious institution, because Freemasonry is not a religion, and it's not incompatible with any religion. We accept people from any creeds, doctrines, and faiths, so long as they affirm belief in a supreme being or higher power. However, it does confer moral teachings. So if you're a Christian and you don't go to church, and you become a Freemason, and you go to lodge, you will receive moral contributions to your being that are in conformity to Scripture. And I think that's a wonderful thing. And you also get all the benefits of being in a lodge, which are very different from those of being in a church. Church is not so close bound as a lodge. It is not so certain as a lodge. There can be many types of people in a church, and you do not know them. So again, very beneficial, and it benefits a certain kind of person, and is definitely not right for everybody.
Right. So I have a few follow-up questions that are just coming to mind that I think are important. And my memory is a transient thing. So the one that I most recently remember is, why do you think it is that the Catholic Church has seen fit to publish papal bulls and high-level writs of authority forbidding Catholics from participation in Freemasonry? What do you think is the origin of the schism or the antipathy between the Catholic Church and the Freemasonics?
Well, it's a great question. The original right and correct answer is that Freemasonry does not agree with the exclusivity of Catholicism, at least not as pertaining to Freemasonry. We do not believe that Catholics are higher and more correct than all other faiths, and as such, we sit shoulder to shoulder with people of other faiths. I sit with people of Jews, Muslims. I've sat with a Zoroastrian many times in the lodge. And there are many practitioners of a great number of religions, including some that I had never even heard of in the first place, who are within Freemasonry and who are equal on the level. They are all brothers, just as I am. And no one stands above any other, regardless of his position in the lodge, without the lodge, no matter his rank or possessions. We're all Master Masons. So that is the primary disagreement between Catholicism and Freemasonry. Historically, the Bavarian Illuminati, which was a separate organization conceived by Adam Weishaupt in Bavaria in, I believe, the 16th century. It may have been far later than that, but I've got, frankly, no clue. I'm actually going to look it up real quick. But the Bavarian Illuminati was an explicitly anti-papist organization. Yeah. 1st May 1776. I was just making shit up. 1st of May 1776. So the Illuminati is a name given to several groups, but the proper one historically is the Bavarian Illuminati, which was an Enlightenment era secret society, basically which motivated itself against the church. And because the Illuminati identified itself with Freemasonry, now keep in mind that relationship was not consented to in reverse, as in Freemasonry did not identify with the Illuminati. There have been a number of organizations, even to this day, which identify themselves with Freemasonry and which we reject. But the Illuminati was explicitly anti-papist and directly attempted to undermine the Catholic Church. So that is another reason. And I'd just like to say that the reason the United Grand Lodge of England has to preside over the approval of Grand Lodges is because there are so many clandestine organizations which purport to be Freemasonry. There are Nigerian scammers on Facebook that will try to initiate you into Freemasonry for a modest fee of $1,000 sent exclusively via Xbox gift cards. And people fall for it all the time. There's a cohort of people who purport to be Freemasons in Tanzania, of whom I've been made aware, who scam people out of all their money and then convince them to murder their parents. Those are obviously not Freemasons. But the matter of fact is that people see this as some sort of scary thing. I mean, I've shown people the ring and they immediately become very wary of me. It's, oh, he's in the Illuminati, whatever. Even people will say this in Spanish. I don't communicate with them at all. They see the ring. Like, oh, it's Illuminati, what have you. And they cringe away. The problem, of course, becomes that reputation is put onto us by other organizations which seek to sap our reputation and to undermine us, ironically enough.
Fascinating, and really, I do appreciate this insight. Now, I want to open it up again to the audience. Does anyone have a question they want to ask? Because I have a couple more. Does anyone have one they want to ask first?
Yeah, please, I'll take them.
Yeah, what is
ahead.
Jabulon, or am I saying that right?
That was exactly what I was about to ask about, Ryder. Jabulon, what is this idea of a spider being with the head of a king and a frog and a cat? Supposedly Jabulon, where does this come from? Does it have any legitimate connection to Freemasonry, or is this another hoax?
So Jabulon, if I understand correctly, was actually a concept in fiction, which was purported to be the word of a master mason. Now, I, as a master mason, knowing the word of a master mason, which I cannot tell you, can at least tell you that to the best of my knowledge, it's not that one. Now, I couldn't, again, tell you like exactly what it is or correct it at all, but there's been none of that in Freemasonry. Now, of course, the typical like crowned head of a spider or whatever, head of a man, cat, is I believe the Dictionnaire Infernal, which illustrates most of the major demons purported in demonology or in the Clavicula Solomonensis. And imagery has been borrowed from there since its original publication. So I believe that is, again, much like the Taxel hoax, an attempt to create this, we've stolen the Ark of the Covenant type of unholy reputation for the fraternity. And frankly, I have no idea where that word came from, although I have heard that it's an amalgamation of 3 different names. Something about, joining these 3 names together and forming some other being. Anyone worth their salt will tell you that you can't just take 3 names of 3 different spiritual entities and just tack them together and form some secret other thing, and then presume that that's going to be the word that. So now you've invented this, right? And now you're trying to say that that is the secret word that Master Masons have been passing down for hundreds of years. I'm not going to swear at those people, but I'd like to tell them to, let's say, take a long walk off a short pier.
Okay. Decisively clear enough. Does anyone else have another question they want to ask?
Question, can you all hear me?
Yep.
We can.
Peg-based. That can be so forward. I heard a while back, I can't exactly remember when, but I heard, I think through TikTok, that there was a lot of lodges set on
It's a good
fire.
way to start. I've heard through TikTok.
There was a lot of lodges set on fire. I don't know if this is true, if this was just a staged event or whatever, but if it did happen, and if there's any truth to this, what do you, if you can share, do you know the reasoning behind the attackers, the vandalists, like why they did it?
There have been a number of attacks on Masonic lodges by conspiracy theorists. There have been a number of arsonists. There was one in June of last year who burned down a lodge in Florida after dumping gasoline in it. He was caught because he returned to make sure that the lodge was still burning. He said that using explosives was too dangerous. There was another one in September, investigated Oak Island, interestingly enough, which we were discussing earlier. November 6th was an attack on that last year. January of last year, Arlington. And so, I mean, frankly, people fucking burn the buildings down all the time because they hate Freemasons. And again, I've been over that. I don't really know why. I'm currently reading a book by Dr. Alexander Piatigorsky, who's, I believe, a PhD of comparative religion. It's called Who's Afraid of Freemasons? And it's heavy reading. Like, I don't think most people would enjoy pacing through it as I do. But it goes through extensively the history of Freemasonry and its present state and the origins of anti-Masonic sentiment, why people dislike the fraternity. It's extremely dense, and you could read it as not. I assure you that if you decide you want to know more on this subject, you go to your local bookstore and ask them for the section on Freemasonry. They'll direct you to the books on Freemasonry, and there will be many, and you can read them. But generally, the reason people burn these buildings down is because they have some misconception that they're, engaging in some justified act against the New World Order or something like that.
Thank you for that explanation. It's very well thought out. You're just a very explanatory, creative person, and I respect you.
Thank you, sir. I respect you as well.
It's been a great asset and boon to the community to have your perspective. This becomes a personal question that is just a curiosity of my own personal spiral code, which is, is quite bizarre. But my ex-wife was fairly high level in the government, and I was at a lower level in the government. And so she had connections in the government, and she suggested to me, hey, some of my friends in the government thought, maybe your husband should join the Masons because we're Masons and whatever, right? And she asked me if I wanted to join, and I thought about it, and I wasn't sure because, on the one hand, the idea of an initiatory process of enlightenment and the survival of the ancient mystery traditions and Eleusinian mysteries of Egypt and so forth, or whatever it was, appeals to me. But on the other hand, I have a inherent distrust of anything that asks me to enter into an agreement without knowing the end result, because I feel then you could get me to take a binding agreement that I'm going to follow this, and then only on the 33rd degree tell me, psych, it's different than you thought it was. And you mentioned that you were involved in Scientology, and that's an experience a lot of Scientologists have had when they find out that Xenu and all this stuff is part of it. They don't find that out till the sunk cost fallacy. The investment is high enough that they're unlikely to change their mind at that point. Same thing happens with, as I understand it, Mormonism or the Church of Latter-day Saints, where they get to a certain level in the initiatory temple tradition, which is sort of like a Freemasonic based religion, it seems. And then they say, oh, well, we're part of the priesthood of Satan, and Lucifer is the spirit brother of Jesus. And it's kind of like by the time you're that deep in it, you're not going to pull out. Now, in my case, it was very strange because they said they will initiate me into the Freemasons, but they want Freemasons to come and live in my house. And they want them to observe everything I do day to day, morning till night, from breakfast till dinner till going to bed. They want to live in my house and watch me and everything I do. And I said, well, I'm not comfortable with that. That seems like a massive invasion of my privacy, and I'm not willing to accept that. Now, every Freemason I've ever talked to has told me that is not the process. That is completely unheard of. They have no idea why they would have suggested that, because that is not how it's usually done. But in my case, I was offered entrance into Freemasonry under the condition that they came and lived in my family home with me and my wife and watched me from morning till night. So can you?
And you were offered this by those government people?
Yeah. So my wife was, both myself and my ex-wife were government employees. She was a government employee at a significantly higher level than I was, but we were both government employees. And out of, nepotistic or, mutual support, they were like, well, we can help your husband out by bringing him into Freemasonry, but the condition is Masons are going to come live in your house and watch everything you do from morning till night. And I said, I'm not comfortable with that, and I'm not going to agree to that, both for that reason and because I'm not entirely sure where this leads. Like, I don't know if you're leading me on And so, but the thing is,
I'm sorry.
let me just finish, please, and then I want to hear your response. Every single Mason I've talked to has been like, that is not the process. I have no idea why they would have said that to you. That's not how we do it. So can you give me any insight into why they would have proposed that to me specifically if that's not the normal process?
So what they're clearly referring to is the committee of investigation. And what I'd like to make explicitly clear is that a committee of investigation is allowed to do basically whatever they want in terms of what they say in order to assess you. And I think that it may very well have been the case that, I don't want to say that they were fucking with you, but that had you agreed to those terms, they never would actually have come to fruition. I don't presume, based on my experience with the fraternity, that that was the case, but it wouldn't be the wildest thing I've heard of happening among regular lodges. I think had you gone up the chain of their lodge and told, the worshipful master or the grand master and said, what's going on here? That may well have resolved differently, because any Freemason in good standing, upon hearing from the grand master that they've done something wrong, is either going to conform or get kicked the fuck out. So, had you brought that up to some sort of other authority and attempted to look into it further, it may well have gone differently, even if it was something that they were representing in earnest. And I assert that it may well not have been. They may have just, come there, done the regular investigation and left. It may also be the case that this is a separate lodge with different bylaws as to how committees of investigation have to be executed. For instance, there's a lodge here that's restricted by charter to 25 members, and de facto, none of them are worth less than $15 million. If you want to visit, you have to be invited. And if a member dies, there is actually an extensive petition among the members of that lodge as to who they want to nominate for the next position. And it's pretty well understood that you don't say no if you get an invitation to that lodge. So there are a lot of things that happen that are not explicitly outside of regular Freemasonry, which are unorthodox regarding most of the fraternity. And by the way, I'd also like to point out that the Eleusinian mysteries were Greek.
Right. I'm not saying it is exactly a continuation of the Eleusinian mysteries, but what I observe is that Freemasonry is more or less the last extant initiatory tradition along that line, which continues into the 2024 era, right? Most of them have died out. The Freemasonic system of initiation continues, and that's interesting in and of itself. But I will repeat, why was I given this special condition that normal Masons are not, do you think? Is it because they had a special suspicion of me? Because I didn't even apply in the first place. They tried to recruit me, but then they gave me a condition.
Well, that's another red flag.
Right. I never said I want to be a Mason. They said, does your husband want to be a Mason? And if so, this is the condition. And then I said no. And that doesn't seem to be the normal order of things in Masonry. So I'm trying to understand that.
Well, to drop the official speaking on behalf of the fraternity thing and return to you as a member of this community. Now, of course, I don't speak on behalf of the fraternity. I'm not an official representative. I'm just speaking in my capacity as an individual experience. But it sounds to me like you were being offered initiation into something far different, which was more related to whatever sort of tight-knit government circle was occurring. And that if you had indeed engaged with that, you may well have become privy to some sort of higher order with lots of back scratching occurring at that level of government.
Okay. There was another thing I wanted to ask. Oh yeah, in Winnipeg, Manitoba, where I live, the Freemasonic temple, ironically, is at 420. That's the address, 420, which is kind of funny.
Oh, that's funny.
And yeah, and in Winnipeg, we have this tradition where we have these giant polar bears, and there's quite a few of these polar bears spread throughout Winnipeg, and all of them are painted in different ways. And there's one outside the Freemasonic Lodge, and it's a polar bear painted in Freemasonic regalia with the Freemasonic, necklace and the Freemasonic apron. And I've been into that church, or not church, but that Freemasonic temple. There was something else I wanted to ask. I'm not sure if I can remember it. While I collect my thoughts, does anyone else have a question or comment?
Yes, I have another question. This is my final question. Egg-based. Um, I'm really curious because I didn't realize that Freemasonry, when you go through, like, I think you said the first degree, you have this like energetic shift change in your persona and your well-being and in just your being as a whole. It could just change you forever, I think is what you said. I'm
Yeah, the
wondering
third
if that
degree.
I'm wondering if that also entailed that when you go through the first degree initiation, that you're able to keep secrets a lot better, or maybe perfectly, just because you went through the first degree. Is that the case?
Well, I'd like to say that I've always been very good at keeping secrets. And that is indeed one of the conditions that they most commonly ask you at some point. Now, I'm sure in some jurisdictions they just take it as an assumption. But they do ask you if you can keep a secret. And I'd like to also state that the third degree was the big change and turnaround for me and not the first. But no, I don't think my capacity to keep secrets increased or decreased. I do think that the incentive for me to maintain that capacity has really increased, knowing that there are things that I will take to my grave, absolutely. And knowing that there are things that I know that you could, strap me to a chair and begin pushing drywall screws through my wrists, and I still would not divulge to you. Knowing that it definitely gives you a certain capability you didn't have before. Um,
I'd like to,
I mean, you know,
I'd like to ask you another question. To what extent do you feel that the initiatory practice of Freemasonry leads to a knowledge, understanding, and practice of what we would call Western ceremonial magic? In other words, is the Freemasonic tradition a magical tradition, or is it an initiatory tradition but not a magical tradition?
I'm going to say something contentious. It's an initiatory tradition. I believe it's a magical one. Having practiced ceremonial occultism, the people performing it, even if they do not realize what they're doing, very effectively execute to the letter a series of ritualistic instructions, which do indeed have a profound spiritual effect. I have had transcendental experiences in open lodges. And yeah, that's about all I'll say on that.
That's fair enough. Now, this is a personal question, and there's no right or wrong answers, of course. Have you ever read through the Moth Academy channel of this server?
I will admit that I have not dedicated the time to comprehensively go through the material there.
Well, I would simply ask you to do so, because I think it would be interesting to compare and contrast what I understand the Moth Academy to be with how you are describing Freemasonry, because it's obvious to me that the basic concept is the same, but apparently the organization is different and the grades and so forth are different, but the concept, based on what you've said so far, appears to be similar. So I would appreciate your feedback on that. There's no rush on that. It's just something I would kind of like your take on. I think this has been highly illuminating. I feel like there was at least one more question I wanted to ask. Does anyone else have a question they wanted to ask? Okay, so here's a final question, right? And this is kind of a, don't take this seriously. Take it as kind of like a joke hardball question. What would you say to all the people who say that Freemasonry is a honeypot intended to attract intelligent and deep thinking individuals into a path that they initially think is monotheistic and sacred, but which only at the highest degrees of initiation reveals itself to be ultimately Luciferian in nature?
I've heard it before a number of times. It was the main argument that I considered against my joining at the time. It was presented by a number of people whose opinions I greatly respected, who cautioned me that at some point I would find out that what I had done was not what I had intended to do. I came to the conclusion via prayer, meditation, discernment, and experience, and contacting entities which are by no, how do I want to put that? There's no chance that the things which I asked these questions to were lying and did not know the answers. And I asked those questions to far higher authorities than any Freemason, no matter how powerful upon the earth, could purport to interact with. Because no person who would pursue the darkness could ever seek to derive truth from the sources that I contacted.
A good answer.
And it came to my understanding that if I were to encounter a cabal of individuals who happened to be initiated at the highest levels of this fraternity, who then operated externally, something which did not conform to the lessons that I'd been taught, that they would offer me that opportunity and that I could decline it, but that they were not affiliated with the fraternity and that they may or may not any longer exist. But if they did, for instance, it was not some grand satanic conspiracy. It was probably more along the lines of insider trading. And for the record, I mean, if I'm offered an opportunity to harm no one and to steal money from corporations by investing in them and then selling at favorable times, I'll effectively view that as just really good financial advice. And so long as I don't have to participate in any sort of, demonic conspiracy. Like if there's a bunch of really smart guys in a room who are all oath bound to keep each other's secrets, and they happen to use that to better themselves in a number of ways, then that seems like a grander expression of what is already a series of values that I am privy to.
Thank you for that answer. And now I've remembered the other question I wanted to ask you. So if you look at the server roster of this particular server, the Temple Mount, you'll notice that I occupy the position of Grand Master. Now, I myself am neither a Mason nor am I highly educated in the degrees of Masonry, and yet multiple times you've referred to the rank of Grand Master within Masonry. Now, my connection to the rank of Grand Mastery is within the concept of the Knights Templar and the system of military organization that they had. So, can you comment briefly on the connection between the Knights Templar and the Freemasons? My understanding is that Knights Templar is the 31st or 32nd rank of Freemasonry, somewhere up there in the 30s. So, what is the
connection? The Knights Templar is actually go ahead, finish your
Well, that's it. I'm just saying I know there is a rank of the Freemasons that's called Knights Templar, and you have used the term Grand Master, and I just noticed that's my rank in the server, but it has nothing to do with Freemasonry. So I'm just wondering, well, obviously it does have something to do with Freemasonry, but what I'm asking is to explain to me what is the connection between the Knights Templar and the Freemasons, and what is the significance of the rank of Grand Master?
So, what I'll say. First off, is that let me ask you this: do you know who the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar was?
Gilles Giuseppe?
No, it was Jacques de Molay.
Thank you. Correct.
And Jacques de Molay was burnt at the stake for heresy, for accusations of worshiping demons and devils and things. Very similar sentiments to what we experience as Freemasons today. While he was being burned, he issued a 3-part curse on the Pope, the King, and the King's issue, that they all would die. and I believe he said within a year or something. And all of them did. They died horrible deaths within a year, because they had condemned him, a righteous man, to die for the sin of blasphemy and heresy. Now, of course, I would imagine, right, that if you burn a righteous man, and instead of praying for the forgiveness of his enemies, he spouts a curse at these people who obviously deserve to be removed from the face of the planet, and they are. That there's something to that. Now, first off, the boys' order of Freemasonry for young men who then become Freemasons afterwards usually is the Order of Demolay, and it emulates a lot of Freemasonry. So that's one thing. There's the Knights Templar connection there. But also, the York Rite has chapter, council, and commandery, and I believe they're all each composed of 3 degrees. So it's 9 total degrees in the York Rite. The last 3 degrees, the commandery degrees, terminate in the Knights Templar degree. So the highest ranking York Rite Masons are Knights Templar. It's an explicitly Christian order, and in order to join the York Rite, you must swear fealty to and to commit your life to the defense of the Christian faith. These people.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you specified this is a Protestant order because there is an irreparable, seemingly, schism between the Catholic Church and Freemasonry. But you're saying the Knights Templar are an explicitly Christian organization, which, if I understand correctly, means they are therefore an Anglican or Protestant organization.
No, I don't believe they differentiate between Reformed and non-Reformed faiths. I just believe that the Catholics don't like them. But Freemasonry freely admits Catholics. And there are indeed a number of Masonites, as we call them, who are members of the Freemasons and the Knights of Columbus. And they don't see any conflict there. I am in full view of the local priests and indeed the bishop, a Freemason, and none of them have denied me the sacrament. Of course, they're supposed to. The difference being, of course, that they understand that godly men in a state of grace are godly men in a state of grace, and that Freemasons are frequently godly men who seek after a state of grace. So the Knights Templar are an explicitly Christian order, the degree. And for instance, the Right Eminent Grand Commander, who I believe is James Ogilvy right now, the Right Eminent Grand Commander of the York Rite of Massachusetts, is a great guy. Absolutely fantastic. Stand-up Christian family guy. Love the whole thing, and the York Rite's fantastic. Now, of course, the Scottish Rite is the other side, the 32nd stuff. And that was all what we were discussing earlier. But yeah, that's the Knights Templar connection is through the York Rite.
I would like a brief permission to apologize. I believe I have unintentionally slandered the Freemasons in a fairly serious way, because when you asked me who was the Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, of course, is the correct answer. I believe I said Gilles Duceppe. Now, I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure Gilles Duceppe was actually like a really evil, satanic, horrible guy along the lines of like Elizabeth Bathory, who did atrocious things. So I just want to clarify that that was absolutely a false attribution on my part. There is no connection between Gilles Duceppe and Freemasonry, and I do not wish to commit slander. He is not in any way associated with Freemasonry, and I have no idea why my mind made that connection, but it was absolutely incorrect, and I want to clarify that. And I would recommend you don't research Gilles Duceppe, because it will not be good for your brain. But I just want to clarify that that was wrong. Jacques de Molay indeed was. And again, my understanding is that the Knights Templar were subjected to torture, and they were forced to give false confessions under torture, which, of course, under modern legal jurisprudence, we would understand that confessions given under torture are not legitimate. Because, of course, if you torture someone long enough, they'll confess to anything. And they made the Knights Templar confess to stepping on the cross of Christ and spitting on the cross of Christ and worshiping Baphomet. And, realistically, they were framed and they were set up. And they appear to have continued on into Portugal, I believe, where I might go soon. And I just wanted to clarify that Gilles de Sep is not associated with Freemasonry, and I apologize for that mistake.
Well, and I appreciate it. But for the record, the Knights Templar were persecuted not because they were actually heretics, but because they were the first bank, and they owned. The Knights Templar had this vast repository of assets and receivables, basically, and it challenged the authority of the papacy, which at the time was not this supreme financial authority, right? They didn't have millions of dollars, right? And the Knights Templar held on to a lot of this money. And the problem there was, of course, that the Catholics wanted to take it, and they wouldn't explicitly give it to them. So, it's like why we have a Grand Master. We're bound to all these oaths that you're not, right? And it wasn't quite sede vacante, but it definitely was. Why would we give you all of this money that's not yours? Right. We need it for the order. And so it's like, okay, we'll admit that you're heretics, and we'll stretch you out and cut off your fingers, and do whatever, red hot pokers in the eye until you admit that you're heretics, and then we'll burn you to death. Yeah. So that was sort of the point there, and yeah. So.
And there was something else I wanted to comment on. We have to do a whole other podcast on the Knights Templar. We have to do a whole podcast on these various subjects. I think we've covered a lot in this episode. So perhaps, why don't we put it one more time to the audience? Questions, comments you want to get off your chest before you lose your chance?
Yeah, I would appreciate if anybody has any questions to bring them forward while we're in the recorded environment.
I mean, I have many more questions, honestly. We could do a whole separate episode on Masonry because we haven't talked about things like the Shriners or the Order of the Eastern Star or the various, side groups or the Catholic analogies like the, Order of the Holy Sepulchre of Jerusalem or the Order of Malta, which I'm not presuming that you are necessarily involved in any way or knowledgeable about, but these are all things I'd like to talk about. But yeah, does anyone in the audience have a question? Because we've probably gone about 2 hours now.
Yeah.
If not,
right around there.
Once, twice, and thrice. Forever hold your peace. Okay. Well, thank you.
Come on. So somebody ask a question. Come on. Somebody go. Hughes asked two. Somebody speak up.
I got a question.
Okay.
I'll ask. Oh, sorry.
So now we got three. There you go. So Crimson and then Teos.
I would say Teos said something before me.
Okay.
And then I said something.
Okay, here's what's gonna happen. We're gonna go Teos, we're gonna go Crimson, then we're gonna go Pure Eternal. Please be patient. Thank you. Go ahead, Teos.
Right. So I would like to just, I think, push back a little bit on, I think, kind of the dismissive nature of, like, I think Eggbase is such an intelligent person. He's obviously, when he's generalizing and saying there's no conspiracies or there's nothing going on, it's not like that. But in a regional sense, he said that, there, even when he was talking about what was going on with your wife, Shogun, that it could have been some kind of like political, like in-group kind of thing that's going on, and it's a small group of people. And then talked about an order that's 25 people only, and you have to be, a millionaire to be in it. And, so there are these extremely exclusive, private orders and groups. And then also I would just like to say is, like, whenever I watch these documentaries and I see about, like, who's in control of, like, a particular town, right? Because really that's what it is. You're running the town, right? You're running the county. But these lodges aren't running, states or anything. It's just like one lodge is probably having enough influence for that county, that city, right? Anyway, when you watch these documentaries, you see, like, it's one guy who runs the whole town. Like, these RICO acts, these gangsters, these criminals who have all of these massive connections. And it's like one guy, Tukey Williams, and it's just it can be really a small thing. And so I don't think it's necessarily that these groups aren't involved in conspiracies or in pandering to each other. It's just that it's on a smaller scale. It's not worldwide, controlling you through your wireless router, making you a robot kind of stuff. Anyway, that's just what I would say.
Okay.
I think
Is that a question?
Well, if I
Yeah,
could
I wasn't
build,
sure if that was
if I could build on that observation, I do think that even if Freemasonry as a whole is a benevolent organization with benevolent intentions, it would be unrealistic to think that small subgroups or cells do not form within that overall organization who use nepotism, etc., to advance business, political, or personal interests. That would simply be normal human psychology, and there's no reason to believe that any group would be exempt from that, including the Freemasons. They may be protected from it by a shared common value, just like in the server we have a shared common value of the rules and stuff, but basic human psychology remains what it is. So when you have rich, powerful people meeting in secret back rooms with secret handshakes and so forth, to think they won't make, mutually advantageous business deals or whatever would be naive. But that doesn't mean that Freemasonry is only for that purpose, or that that is its intended purpose, if I could interpret that as I saw it.
Right. I just think that, if I'm going to be totally honest, as a man growing up and seeing these different societies in like my hometown and everything, and knowing that it's just like a bunch of like cops and firefighters get together and have barbecues and everything. But to deny the fact that that gives them it's something, there's something there. It's like a camaraderie, and there's definitely like outs for people when other people wouldn't have those same outs. And so, I don't know. I think you're right, Sugar. It's just totally naturally human behavior. But I did want to just address it, because it seemed like it was kind of, it seemed to me like Egg was saying, in one hand, that there's nothing going on at all, but then at the other hand, he said there's a group where there's 25 members only, and they all are worth 15 million apiece. And then immediately it made my eyebrow go, huh? How do you know what they're doing?
Well, how do I know what they're doing? But there's also a point to be had here about the logical conclusion of the trust imparted on other people who have been in the same place as me. I know so much about another Freemason. And I know that without ever having met them, to such a degree that when you visit a foreign country, indeed, when I visited Vancouver, you contact those people in advance. And at the very least, they provide you with a litany of information about the place to whence you are traveling. And that's, of course, inimitably valuable. But for instance, like I went to Seattle. We were trying to figure out where to go camping. We drove past a massive square and compasses on the side of the road that said Masonic Campground. And I said, pull in there. I went and showed them my dues card. They gave us an amazing campsite for like free the first night and then $30 for the second night. They had this gorgeous section of river with a beach that was entirely theirs for us to swim in. There was like this huge cookout. I actually have a picture of me with all these guys from this Filipino lodge, Luz Faminda Lodge in Seattle. And it was this massive collection of like guys from the Philippines who would open this lodge. They brought us in. It was this huge spread, this massive dinner. They were pouring out all this cognac, whatever. We got incorrigibly wasted. They sent me off with like probably $200 worth of booze in like a box. Like, here you go. Here's all the bottles we don't want to take home. It's like all these full bottles, like, cognac and vodka, nice whiskey. And here you go, rum. Here, take this. Shit, okay. And it's just, because the thing is, if someone visits from another jurisdiction, especially all the way across the country, it's a huge event. It's like, oh my God, here's a Freemason who we haven't met before, who's come all this way, and here he is with us. And you don't ask him for that. It's not like I went in there and I was like, hey, can you guys give me a whole bunch of free shit and feed my girlfriend and I and put us up? And then we found out, of course, that they paid for our campsite. It just, the reality of the situation is that if someone else is, if I know that they stood exactly where I stood, then that person gets a degree of treatment that no other human being in the world of any other category or demographic is going to receive, ever, save perhaps my wife someday. You know, I'm going to go out of my way, not only because it's the right thing to do, but you know, like if I'm oath bound to assist these guys, but also like not just to assist them. I am not obligated, but overtly willing to just do whatever I can for, you know, sure. Yeah. And so obviously, you know, there's going to be a degree of treatment that certain people receive from other Masons that others do not. And I see nothing wrong with that, frankly.
No, neither
Much in
do
the
I.
same way that much in the same way that veterans get preferential treatment, you know, it's like if you've been a part of a certain group, then other people of that group, and even sometimes people who are not of that group, are going to treat it with a certain respect. Obviously. And there's literally nothing that can be done against that. You'd have to work so hard to deliberately refuse to treat Freemasons differently in order to make sure that that wasn't the case. So it's obviously going to happen. I'm not saying that it's a matter of policy. I'm not saying that it's supported by the fraternity. I'm not saying that people join with that intention. And I'm not saying that it happens all the time or that anyone like who asks for it will get it. It's our job not to ask it of others. And it's also our job to provide it to people who haven't asked for it. That's the whole point. Is to give relief and assistance to your brothers, even if they don't request it of you. And as a matter of fact, because they won't request it of you, it's your job to know that they're not going to ask.
So I'm cognizant of time and grateful for the time you've given us. I think it's a good time to wrap it up. And I would wonder if you have a closing thought or message for the people to take away from this who might be listening on BitChute or YouTube.
I'm sorry, I know we're over 2 hours now, but didn't we have like one, like Crimson, did you get your question in?
Yeah,
True Eternal, did you
we're not out of time. Pardon me. I mean, as long as the Craig bot is still recording, we can keep going. So if someone had a question that didn't get addressed, please bring it up now.
Yeah, I had oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, mine's quick because I kind of already see how it's going to go. But my question is like, obviously Freemasonry is like shrouded in all this mystery and secrecy, and there's like this secret knowledge. And I just want to know what the secret is. Like what is so great that these people are holding on to other than their bond in brotherhood? It really seems like that's what's controlling the world more than anything. Unless I'm obviously missing out on some sort of big secret and need to still be illuminated.
All right, fine. Because you asked so persuasively, I'll tell you everything. Well, what I will tell you, Crimson, is that it's not pearl clutching. It's not just pearl clutching.
Sorry.
It's not like they have something important that they're just not willing to share. It's
not like I've got the name of my pet rock written on a piece of paper and I just won't tell you what the name of my pet rock is. We're not keeping secrets for secret's sake. We're keeping secrets because it's important.
Well, that actually reminds me of a question I really wanted to ask, which in a weird way may be the same as Crimson's question, and this actually goes beyond the limitations of Freemasonry and into esotericism and Hermeticism as a whole. But if we're going to continue the recording, what is your understanding of the meaning of the quote-unquote sign of silence? And to what extent is that a moral obligation on people who know?
The sign of silence.
Another way to explain it would be, what is the meaning of the parable of the pearls before swine? In other words, if someone knows something, are they morally obligated to keep it secret?
I'm sorry, give it to me one more time.
So, in my understanding, in occult traditions like Hermeticism or Thelemism or the OTO or the Golden Dawn or whatever, they have something called the sign of silence, which is literally the finger over the lips, like shh, right? And the idea is those who know don't speak, and those who speak don't know. And that's my understanding of the sign of silence.
Mm-hmm.
Another parable that relates to that in the Bible is when Jesus says, "Do not cast your pearls before swine, because not only will they trample them into the mud, they will then turn on you and gore you," which means rip your guts out. So both of those parables, one from the Bible and one from the occult tradition, implies that thou should not put holy things before the profane people, or thou should not expose to the ignorant the wisdom of the wise.
Mm-hmm.
And I just was wondering if you could comment on that and how it relates to the concept of Masonry.
Well, it relates to the concept of secrecy as a whole. So it was Lao Tzu who said, those who know do not speak, those who speak do not know. It's a fundamental precept of Taoism. What I'd like to address second is the point about silence in general. I'm sorry, for some reason my brain is shut off. I think I haven't eaten enough or something.
Well,
but so it was that.
My question
was also,
again is this: is the reason? Let me ask you another question. Okay, is the reason that Freemasonry is semi-secret rather than fully secret or fully public because the knowledge that it has would be harmful to some people, and they're trying to protect those people from knowledge that they can't handle? Or is it a secret because they have special powerful knowledge that they want to keep from those who don't deserve it, or both?
Well, I can't speak on that, but things that are secret are by definition proprietary, right? And what I will say is that the sign of silence is generally understood as a protective measure. What it's protecting is generally the information, but it could also be argued that it's protecting the individuals who might receive it were it not obeyed. What I will say is that the sign of silence featured explicitly in Memphis Mizraim, which is a archaic, right, a defunct initiatic tradition in Freemasonry that was based mostly on Kemetism. That is the religion of Egypt and its symbolism. Memphis Mizraim is no longer practiced, and it's no longer considered accepted, and it's not actually Freemasonry anymore. But there are some. I know Quatuor Coronati in England, which is basically it's a lodge of librarians. Basically, they're the real historians who record everything. That they have actually put it on display occasionally just to show what it is, but that explicitly featured the sign of silence, I believe. But mostly it's just about the ability to keep a secret and to know at discretion which things should and should not be disclosed.
Thank you. Last chance, everybody. Don't go.
Yeah, we still had True Eternal to go.
True Eternal,
or Pure Eternal.
Yes, I have a question. Just a quick one. What kind of in Freemasonry does financial dues, that sort of thing? What does Freemasonry support in that perspective over time through initiations and so forth?
Well, it's a great question. Where does the money go? So, well, a lot of the money that goes to Grand Lodge, the money that we retain within our lodge. So, for instance, I pay $212, 76 goes to Grand Lodge, the other 126 stays with my lodge. Money from dues generally goes to paying the bills. Occasionally, so for instance, we have the junior warden who will go out and buy trays of sandwiches and things and bring them to meetings so that we can eat afterwards. The lodge will compensate him for that. But frequently there's charitable donations. So the Rainbow Girls or the DMLA will have a fundraiser. The lodge will donate to that. There will be a charitable cause raised for a brother in distress or something. The lodge will donate to that. But mostly the money goes to keeping the lights on. For instance, we rent a lodge room in a building. We pay the rent on that.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it gets invested. For instance, we're trying to buy a building. So whatever we retain that doesn't immediately go to expenditures goes into investments so that we will eventually be able to buy another building. And then the Grand Lodge dues go to the same thing, keeping the lights on, the maintenance. The Grand Lodge of Massachusetts is a gorgeous, gorgeous building that requires so much cleaning and maintenance and has all of these extremely extravagant light fixtures. The ceiling's insured for like $4 million in Corinthian Hall. That's just the one Grand Hall alone, of which they have two. And then there's a whole bunch of other rooms. There's a whole staff of Grand security, all this other things. And then there's the Brotherhood Fund that explicitly assists in, those causes and makes massive donations to charity. And the Grand Lodge basically decides on that at discretion. For instance, there have been humanitarian crises in the jurisdictions. The Grand Lodges of those jurisdictions have been subordinate to the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. So the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts has made significant contributions to the humanitarian aid in a lot of those crisis zones. Like, for instance, there was a massive, I think it's the Grand Lodge of like Hong Kong, Taiwan or something, but one of the Grand Lodges in exile that meets currently in Japan. There was a massive disaster of some variety. We donated extensively to the assistance there. And if you're familiar with the Shriners Hospitals for Children, some of the leading burn wards in the country, those hospitals are almost exclusively funded by the ancient Arabic order of nobles of the Mystic Shrine, the Shriners. Those hospitals are amazing. I mean, that's like one of the big things. There used to be Masonic homes, retirement homes, Masonic hospitals that were funded by the Masons. The percentage of funding that they get from us has decreased. My lodge, for instance, we put on a turkey shoot. So you go out and shoot targets competitively to win frozen turkeys for Thanksgiving. We usually buy about 8 extras, and then we go to the Veterans Homeless Shelter in the nearby city of Worcester and cook them up for the veterans so they can have Thanksgiving dinner. It's a lot of good shit, I mean, frankly, it's there's sort of a discretionary fund as well, so that it's like, oh, there's this big charitable cause. Let's throw money at it. But it's a charitable organization. I mean, we cover the overhead. We go in for like dinners and sandwiches and shit, and people donate to those to make sure that it gets covered. Yeah, but I mean, that's just about it. The finances are pretty straightforward.
I mean, what I really wanted to get into was basically in the induction ceremony or choosing process of Freemasonry. Does anyone get turned down for the fact that they can't handle dues, that they can't pay for dues? Like, do you have to be wealthy to be a Mason?
Well, it's $212 a year, which I can't do math right now. 212 divided by 12 is less than $18 a month. All right, so for about $8 more, for about $7 more than Spotify Premium, you can be a Freemason. Most people don't have any problem with that financially. If you were in such a position where you literally could not afford to pay $212 a year, and for the record, I have been in that position, and the lodges, some of the guys have covered me, and I've paid them back. I just wanted to make sure I got them paid on time and didn't have the money at that present moment. But if you seek initiation and you don't have any money, then they're probably going to be like, well, why don't we wait until you do? because there are like some minor, I think there's like $100 initiation fee, and it's like $212 a month in my jurisdiction. And that depends on the lodge, it depends on the jurisdiction, depends on a lot of that stuff. Some places it's like 76 or something, $72 a year. I mean, that's such an uncommon occurrence. I mean, generally, if somebody's got a car to drive to the lodge and they've got money to like come out to the dinners with us, then it's like, all right, you can clearly pay $212 in September to have the privilege of being a recognized master mason anywhere in the world. You know?
So I really do think it's time for us to wrap this episode up, but I'm going to open the microphone up one more time. Does anyone have a question that they are dying to get off their chest?
I just wanted to address like the idea of like monetizing secret knowledge and like brotherhood, and I wanted to know how that, what's Egg-based opinion on that.
What I'd first like to say is that it's only monetization if people profit from it, right?
Well, I guess that's true, but you know, you get 1 million Freemasons times $100 initiation fee. That's $100 million.
Okay,
Girl Guide,
but that's a million
free.
That's a million Freemasons divided among God knows how many lodges, divided across God knows how many jurisdictions, right? And then the other thing is that money goes, as I said, to lodges and to grand lodges. The lodges use it to keep the lights on and support charity and pay their expenses and to put on events. And the grand lodges do the same thing. And they contribute to the Brotherhood Fund and contribute to charity. And all the finances are available. You know, it's a non-profit organization. So I don't really understand what you could possibly be. You know, is it monetization of the death of children to open an NGO that feeds starving African children? Anyway, I think that conclusively addresses that. Kasheka, you were going to say something, and then we really do need to terminate this discussion.
Go ahead, Kasheka.
Oh, as a child, I was a Girl Guide. I was also a brownie. And we had to pay our fees and dues and all that stuff. I can't say I remember not being part of basically any group or organization I've been a part of that's just for like really good. We still had to pay our fees, and it was to cover the stuff that you're talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense.
Right. And it's like a monetization of secret knowledge that you have to purchase a driver's license, but you know, whatever. So I would like to enter a bit of a closing statement, if you don't mind, Shug.
That's what I would prefer. Yes, please give us a takeaway for everybody who's listened. What is the main takeaway of Freemasonry for the listeners today, please?
Well, if you've managed to suffer through me bloviating and pontificating about this wonderful esoteric order of which I'm a part, first off, I applaud you, and thanks everyone here in the live audience for being present and for participating. But second, I think it's important that out of all of the long-winded descriptions, that you manage to glean from this some understanding of what is, in fact, a great and well-reasoned institution. And it has existed for a long, long, long time, an incomprehensibly long time for me. I mean, I don't even know what 30 years is like yet. And it will continue to exist for long after my death. I know not how long, but it could be thousands of years. And the mere fact of that illustrates a central point. And that is that Freemasonry, insofar as it has not changed and that innovation is indeed prohibited, continues to be a lesson in an eternal school, which is invaluable and timeless. and which is communicable unto anyone who is good, any man who is good, according to the constitutions. And that this influence has been present at the founding of nations, many of which we recognize. In my case, we recognize the United States as one of the greatest nations in the world. Our founding documents were written in large part by Freemasons in conformity to the thinking of the Enlightenment, in the same way that they had influenced the French Revolution. Freemasonry has been at the heart of so much change in thought for the better and so much moral activity. It's been at the heart and moral core, the driving force of so many great influences throughout history, and has facilitated interpersonal relationships and interactions between contemporaries which would otherwise never have transpired. Much of your history depends on the existence of this great organization. And I would just like people to view it with not reverence necessarily, but a little more respect and some historical enthusiasm, because it is great. And in the same way as you might view any other large and influential thing in the world, look back on it as a key point in history that has done things which are now recognizable as good and positive and productive moments in history, so too should you look upon Freemasonry.
Well said. Thank you very much, Mr. Eggbase. We appreciate your time, and this has been an interesting discussion. We have other discussions with other Masons also available on our YouTube and BitChute podcast channels, where this episode will also be available. Temple Mount Podcast, Temple Mount Official, but most importantly, join the Temple Mount Discord server. We look forward to many more interesting episodes. Keep an eye on the announcements channel. We'll have a podcast every day in the next few days and most days. Thank you again, Eggbase, for your time, and thank you to the audience for attending and participating. God bless.
And thank you.
And remember, don't take the mark of the beast. God bless, and good night.